It was late in the evening when Elon Musk sat hunched over his desk, his eyes strained from hours of reviewing reports. The soft hum of the dimly lit office surrounded him, a constant reminder that even the billionaire CEO couldn't escape the incessant demands of the companies he ran. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, and yet sleep remained elusive. Elon's mind was always racing, flitting from one idea to the next, from one problem to another, his thoughts endlessly chasing each other. He rubbed his tired eyes, letting out a deep sigh. Just 5 more minutes, he muttered to himself, scrolling mindlessly through the digital sea of news articles that filled his phone screen. It was in these fleeting moments of distraction that he came across something unexpected. A headline about education in South Africa. Normally, he might have swiped past it, uninterested, but something about it caught his attention. The article's title read, "A Teacher's Unwavering Commitment, Ms. Michael Griffith, 85, continues to inspire students amid financial struggles." Elon clicked on the article without thinking. Curiosity piqued. As he read, the words seemed to blur into a haze until a familiar name jumped out at him. Ms. Michael Griffith, 85, continues teaching at Petoria Primary School in the face of significant budget cuts. The name alone sent a ripple through his chest. His thumb hovered over the screen as he zoomed in on the photo accompanying the article. It showed a man with silver hair, wearing round glasses, and a warm, determined smile surrounded by a group of eager, young students. The photo seemed almost timeless, capturing the essence of someone who had dedicated his life to shaping minds. The caption beneath the image confirmed it. Ms. Griffith has been teaching science for over 5 decades and continues to lead students at Petoria Primary, inspiring them to dream big despite the challenges the school faces. Elon's breath caught in his throat. Michael Griffith, the same man who had shaped so much of Elon's childhood, who had once guided him through a world where he felt like an outsider, a man who had seen potential in him when no one else did, and who had nurtured his curiosity when others dismissed it as strange. It can't be, Elon whispered to himself, a flood of memories rushing back. He zoomed in on the image, studying the teacher's face, the familiar eyes and smile. Despite the years that had passed, Elon knew it was him. The teacher who had believed in him when he was just a boy with big ideas, a dreamer in a world that didn't always understand him. He read on, barely able to take in the words on the screen. Petoria Primary School was in danger of closing after more than 75 years. Its funding exhausted, and the board was planning to sell the property to make way for a commercial development. The story mentioned that despite the school's bleak future, Mr. Griffith continued to teach with passion, even at the age of 85, refusing to retire. He believed his work was far from finished. Elon leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the twinkling lights of Austin. The weight of the news settled over him like a heavy fog. For a moment, he let his mind drift back, 40 years and thousands of miles away to that small classroom in South Africa. He was 9 years old, awkward, isolated, and often ridiculed by his classmates for his strange questions and love for reading. Most of the teachers didn't know what to make of him, but not Mr. Griffith. He remembered how Mr. Griffith had encouraged him, how he had given him books about renewable energy when the other students laughed at his interest in solar panels. Elon's heart tightened as he recalled the day his homemade rocket had exploded in the schoolyard. The other kids had run in fear, and the principal had been furious, threatening to expel him. But Mr. Griffith had stepped in, defending him. "He's not being reckless," Mr. Griffith had said. "He's being a scientist. Scientists make mistakes, and that's how we learn." A lump formed in Elon's throat as he thought back to that pivotal moment. Mr. Griffith had defended him, taught him that failure wasn't something to be ashamed of, but a stepping stone to success. "You have a special mind, Elon," he had told him. "Don't let anyone make you think that's a bad thing." Elon sat at his desk, his mind buzzing with a whirlwind of thoughts. He couldn't just let this happen. He couldn't let his old teacher's school close without doing something. It wasn't just about saving an institution. It was about honoring the man who had played such a crucial role in his life. He pulled out his phone and quickly searched for more details about Petoria Primary. The school's website was outdated, with no mention of the challenges it was facing. But Elon found a news video, and as it played, He watched a scene of Mr. Griffith teaching his class with the same energy and enthusiasm he had always had. He was now elderly, his movements slower, but his eyes still sparkled with the same passion for science and learning. The video reported that the school was facing imminent closure, its buildings dilapidated, and its funding dwindling. The reporter asked Mr. Griffith what he would do once the doors were closed. "I'll find another classroom," Mr. Griffith had answered, his voice full of resolve. "These children need someone who believes in them." Elon's eyes welled up with emotion. How many children had Mr. Griffith helped over the years? How many futures had he shaped? And now it was all going to be torn down to make way for a shopping mall. Elon couldn't bear the thought of that. His fingers trembled as he picked up the phone and dialed his assistant. "Marissa, I need you to clear my schedule for next week. All of it, every meeting, even the NASA one." There was a pause on the other end. "Even the NASA meeting?" she asked, surprised. "Yes," Elon confirmed. "And I need you to arrange a private trip to South Africa. Petoria, no press. I don't want anyone to know I'm going." Marissa hesitated. "Is everything okay, sir?" Elon looked back at the photo of Mr. Griffith on his computer screen, the teacher who had shaped his childhood. "I have an old debt to repay," he said quietly. Elon's mind raced as he sat back in his chair, staring out of his office window. The neon lights of Austin flickered beneath the vast Texas sky, but his thoughts were far from the bustling tech hub below. He wasn't thinking about Tesla, SpaceX, or the newest artificial intelligence breakthrough. His thoughts were thousands of miles away, back in his childhood, in a small classroom in Petoria, South Africa, where a teacher had once shaped the course of his life. It was a time when the world seemed bigger and more confusing to him, when he had been a quiet, awkward 9-year-old boy who didn't quite fit in. He remembered how he had always felt different from the other kids, like a square peg in a round hole. He was the kid with his nose buried in books, the one who always asked questions that no one else seemed to care about. His classmates thought he was strange, and most of the teachers didn't know what to do with him. They often labeled him as odd, as someone who didn't belong. But Mr. Griffith was different. He had always been different. Elon remembered the first day he had walked into Mr. Griffith's classroom, a man already in his mid-40s, with a slightly graying beard and glasses perched on his nose. He had looked so out of place compared to the other teachers at the school, who often seemed detached, methodical, or unapproachable. Mr. Griffith, however, had an energy about him that made Elon feel seen, that made him feel that his endless questions about the universe mattered. "Mr. Griffith," Elon had asked one day, "do you think we could power an entire city with solar panels?" The other kids had burst into laughter, thinking the question was ridiculous. They were just 9-year-olds, uninterested in energy solutions or the idea of renewable power. But Mr. Griffith didn't laugh. Instead, he had smiled, a knowing smile, as if he had been waiting for someone to ask that very question. He had nodded thoughtfully and said, "That's an excellent question, Elon. Let's see what we can learn about that." For the first time in his life, Elon felt like someone truly understood him. The other teachers had always given him detentions for his constant questions, but Mr. Griffith encouraged him. He gave him books on renewable energy, wind turbines, and solar power. He helped Elon build his first small solar panel for the science fair, showing him how to create something from scratch and understand how it worked. That was the moment Elon knew he was different, not in a bad way, but in a way that would help him change the world. But not everything was perfect. Elon had struggled to fit in with the other kids at Petoria Primary School. He was often bullied, ridiculed for his passion for subjects they found boring. He would hide in the library during lunch breaks, a sanctuary where he could read about space, the stars, and the mysteries of the universe. It was a place where he didn't feel out of place. The other kids would call him a bookworm, and worse, but he didn't care. His mind was always elsewhere, in a world of possibilities that no one else seemed to see. One day, while hiding behind a bookshelf, trying to escape the harsh words of his classmates, Mr. Griffith had found him. He didn't scold him for being alone, didn't tell him to go outside and play. Instead, he sat down beside him, looked at the book Elon was reading, and said, "Space travel, huh? Fascinating, isn't it? Did you know there are scientists who think it might be possible to travel through black holes?" Elon's eyes had widened. He was surprised. He had never expected a teacher, let alone one as busy as Mr. Griffith, to show such interest in something so unusual to others. Really? Could we go through them? Elon asked, not fully understanding the concept of black holes at the time. Maybe someday, Elon, Mr. Griffith had said. But who knows? Maybe you'll be the one to figure it out. That moment stuck with him, even decades later. It was one of the earliest times someone had told him his curiosity was a strength rather than a weakness. While other teachers dismissed his strange questions, Mr. Griffith embraced them. He saw the potential in Elon's curious mind, and that belief was the catalyst for everything that followed. As Elon sat in his office, those memories rushed back like waves, each one reminding him how deeply Mr. Griffith had impacted his life. Without him, would he have had the same drive to create companies like Tesla and SpaceX? Would he have been the same person without the belief and encouragement Mr. Griffith had given him when no one else would? Elon smiled to himself as he thought about the rocket he had built for the science fair all those years ago. It had been a small homemade contraption made from household materials, designed to fly into the air, but it had exploded on the launch pad, sending a burst of smoke and debris into the playground. The other students had screamed, and the principal had been furious. Elon had stood there terrified, knowing he was likely going to be expelled. But then Mr. Griffith had stepped in. "Mr. Musk is not being disruptive," Mr. Griffith had said firmly, addressing the principal. "He's being a scientist. Scientists make mistakes, and they learn from them. You can't punish curiosity, or we'll stop learning." Elon had been spared expulsion, but more importantly, he had been shown that failure was not the end. It was part of the process of learning. Mr. Griffith had later sat with him, showing him what went wrong with the rocket and teaching him how to improve the design. That was the day Elon learned that failure wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace because it led to improvement. Without Mr. Griffith's encouragement, would Elon have had the courage to continue experimenting, to push the boundaries of what others thought was possible? Would he have had the fortitude to pursue his dreams, no matter how unconventional they seemed? In that moment, Elon knew the answer. Probably not. And now, decades later, it was time for him to give back. The school where Mr. Griffith had spent so many years inspiring students was on the verge of closing. A place that had nurtured his own dreams, a place that had helped him believe in his potential when no one else did, was being torn down to make room for a shopping mall. Elon felt a fierce determination rise within him. He couldn't let this happen. He wouldn't. Not on his watch. Picking up his phone again, Elon quickly typed a message to his assistant. He knew what he had to do. This wasn't just about saving a building. It was about preserving a legacy, ensuring that other children like him, who didn't fit into the traditional mold, would have the chance to dream big, think differently, and change the world. The plane's wheels touched down on the tarmac of Petoria International Airport with a soft thud, and for a moment, Elon Musk just sat back in his seat, staring out the window as the familiar landscape of South Africa stretched out below. The hot, dry air hit him the moment he stepped off the plane, carrying the distinct sense of dust, jacaranda trees, and the uniquely earthy smell of the city he hadn't visited in years. It was a feeling he hadn't realized he'd been missing. The last time Elon had been here, he was just a child, small and unremarkable in a world that seemed so much bigger than he was. Now, decades later, he was one of the wealthiest men on the planet, a symbol of innovation and technological progress. Yet as he stood there, surrounded by the hum of the airport, it felt like time had folded in on itself. He had come back not as a business magnate, but as a son, a former student. Someone who owed a debt of gratitude to a teacher who had believed in him when no one else did. A staff member from the airport greeted him with a warm, "Welcome back, sir," in the local accent, which surprisingly felt familiar to him. The assistant had arranged for Elon's visit to remain discreet. No media, no fanfare. Elon wasn't here to make a spectacle. He wasn't here for recognition. He was here for something far more personal. The car waiting for him was a simple, unassuming model, nothing too extravagant, just the way Elon preferred it. He didn't want to draw attention. His assistant had made sure that everything was kept low-key, including his accommodations. A modest hotel away from the downtown area, tucked away in a quiet part of the city, would be his home for the next few days. As the car weaved through the streets of Petoria, Elon found himself looking out the window, soaking in the sights of the city that had once been his entire world. It had changed so much. New buildings had sprung up in places where fields used to be, and shopping malls now dotted the streets where he had once run as a child. The modern world had come crashing in on the city, and though it was still familiar, it felt different, almost like a stranger's version of the place he once knew. His eyes drifted toward the distant mountains that loomed over the city, their jagged peaks still standing tall, as they had done when he was a child. They had always been a constant in his life, something he could count on no matter what. Their presence was both grounding and comforting. Without thinking, the car turned down a street he knew all too well. Elon's heart gave a subtle jolt as he recognized the neighborhood where he had grown up. It was surreal, seeing it again after so many years. The once quiet, humble houses now looked smaller, their paint faded and worn from years of neglect. He could see a few kids playing in front of some homes, laughing and running, just as he once had. But this time, it felt like he was watching someone else's life, not his own. The car slowed as they approached the old house where he had lived as a boy. The once white wall around it was now painted a different color, and the garden had grown wild, no longer the neat rows of plants his mother had carefully tended to. A basketball hoop stood in the driveway, replacing the space where he had once set up model rockets, preparing them for launches that rarely went as planned. It was strange to see it all so different, so distant. The people living there now had no idea that a boy with big dreams had once called that house home. Elon felt a pang of nostalgia, mixed with an odd sense of displacement. He wasn't sure why, but there was something deeply emotional about this visit. It felt like a ghost was walking through his past, someone who no longer belonged, but was still tethered to it by memory. He didn't stop. The car moved on, leaving behind the house where he had once dreamed of flying rockets to the moon, where his mind had wandered to far-off stars, far beyond the mundane world around him. That world had seemed so small back then. Now the universe felt within reach, and yet, as Elon stared out at the city of his youth, it occurred to him that perhaps that boy, who had been laughed at for his dreams, had never truly left. He had just evolved, grown, and found a way to make his dreams a reality. But it all started here, in this small, sometimes painful place. The car turned onto a familiar road, one that led to Petoria Primary School. As they approached the school, Elon felt a flutter of anticipation, mixed with sadness. The tall iron fence that once bordered the playground now sagged in places, the paint peeling away, leaving behind a rusted frame that seemed symbolic of the school's condition. The buildings, once bright and inviting, looked worn, their walls cracked and chipped. It was the same school where he had spent some of his happiest and most difficult years. The playground was eerily quiet. There were no sounds of children playing, no laughter bouncing off the old buildings. Everything seemed still, as if time had frozen around the place that had been so full of life in his youth. His heart sank as he realized how close this school was to disappearing, just as the memories of his childhood were slowly fading. Elon stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance, his footsteps slow, deliberate. His mind was filled with memories of running through these very halls, the sense of wonder that had driven him to dream bigger than the world around him could understand. He wondered if anyone remembered the strange, awkward kid he had been. If anyone remembered that there had once been a student who had dared to ask questions others found strange. He wasn't sure, but he hoped that Mr. Griffith did. He walked into the school's main office, which still smelled faintly of floor cleaner and chalk dust. The walls were lined with student artwork, drawings of rockets, planets, and solar systems. It was clear that the spirit of innovation that Elon had carried with him all his life had been passed down to the students who followed him. The receptionist, a young woman with a warm smile, looked up when he entered. "Good morning. How may I help you?" she asked. Her name tag read, Namsa Kumalo. "I'm here to visit Mr. Griffith's class," Elon said, adjusting his baseball cap. "I was a former student." "Oh, how wonderful. Miss Griffith will be thrilled to see you," Namsa said, her eyes widening slightly in surprise. She quickly jotted down his name on a visitor's badge. "He's in room 12, teaching the 5th grade science class. If you'd like, you can watch through the window before you go in. Just don't interrupt their lesson." Elon smiled, feeling a wave of nervous excitement. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer than usual. He wasn't sure why, but he felt like a schoolboy again, standing at the threshold of a classroom, uncertain but hopeful. As he walked down the hall, he passed more student artwork on the walls, posters about renewable energy, the water cycle, and famous scientists. There was a poster of Albert Einstein, his wild hair and thoughtful expression, reminding Elon of his own curiosity in science. It was clear that Mr. Griffith's influence had lived on in these walls, shaping the next generation of dreamers. He reached room 12, where the sound of Mr. Griffith's voice carried through the door. He could hear the steady rhythm of his teaching, the way he encouraged the children to think for themselves. The class was discussing energy sources, solar, wind, and hydroelectric power. Elon stood at the window, peering inside, his heart swelling with pride as he saw Mr. Griffith still teaching with the same passion he had decades ago. The class continued for another 20 minutes before the bell rang and the students filed out for lunch. Elon took a deep breath and knocked gently on the door. It was time. The classroom door creaked open as Elon gently knocked, his heart pounding in his chest like a drumbeat. It felt surreal, standing in front of the place that had once shaped his destiny, a room full of memories of a time when he had been just a child with wild ideas, and Mr. Griffith had been the one adult who had believed in him. Through the small window of the door, Elon could see Mr. Griffith standing at the front of the room, still exuding the same warmth and energy that had made him such a unique figure in Elon's life. His hair was now entirely silver, his posture a little slower, but his eyes, they still glimmered with the same enthusiasm for teaching that Elon remembered so vividly. Elon pushed the door open slightly and stepped inside, removing his baseball cap and sunglasses. The familiar scent of chalk and old books filled the air, the very same scent that had greeted him every time he entered this classroom as a young boy. It was comforting, like stepping into a past he had almost forgotten, yet somehow never left behind. Mr. Griffith turned at the sound of the door opening, his expression a mix of curiosity and confusion. His eyes focused on the man who had entered, squinting for a moment, as if unsure of who this visitor might be. He didn't seem to recognize Elon at first. "May I help you?" Mr. Griffith's voice, though older, still carried that same tone of warmth and patience. Elon stepped into the room, feeling a lump form in his throat. "Mr. Griffith," he said softly, his voice trembling ever so slightly. "I don't know if you remember me. It's been a long time." There was a long pause as Mr. Griffith studied him, his expression blank for just a moment. Then, as if a light had flickered on, his eyes widened in recognition. His lips parted in shock, and he took a step forward. "Elon?" Mr. Griffith whispered, a smile slowly breaking across his face. "Little Elon, with the rocket books?" Elon nodded, the lump in his throat tightening. He couldn't find the words at first. His eyes welled up, and it wasn't long before he had to blink them back. It was overwhelming. This reunion, after so many years, with the man who had changed the course of his life, the teacher who had never given up on him. "Mr. Griffith," Elon said again, this time more firmly, his voice filled with both awe and gratitude. "It's really me." "Oh my goodness!" Mr. Griffith exclaimed, his hands reaching out as if to confirm that Elon was standing before him, tangible and real. He embraced Elon in a tight hug, surprising him with the strength in his grip despite his age. Elon bent down slightly, surprised at how small and fragile Mr. Griffith felt, but his embrace was still warm and strong. "I've followed everything you've done, Elon," Mr. Griffith said, pulling back from the hug, his eyes glistening with emotion. "The electric cars, the rockets. I always knew you'd do amazing things. I just never imagined this day would come." Elon, still in shock, smiled back. He had never expected such a warm welcome, but then again, he had never really known what to expect from a reunion like this. A part of him had wondered if Mr. Griffith would remember him, or if, after decades of teaching thousands of children, Elon would be just another face in the crowd. I don't know what to say," Elon stammered. "You were the one who believed in me when I was Just a weird kid with big ideas. I never thought anyone would see my potential." Mr. Griffith smiled knowingly, his eyes twinkling with affection. "You weren't weird, Elon. You were just different. And different is good. It's what makes the world move forward. You had a mind that saw possibilities where others saw walls. And that's why I always believed in you." Elon felt a deep swell of emotion at those words. This wasn't just a reunion. It was a reminder of everything that had shaped him into who he was today. Everything that had led him to start companies like Tesla and SpaceX, all the ideas he had pursued, all the rejection he had faced. He realized now that it all started here, in this very classroom, with a teacher who had treated him like he had potential when no one else did. "I never forgot what you did for me," Elon said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "How you encouraged me when everyone else said I was crazy. I've thought about you, about this school, a lot over the years." Mr. Griffith looked at him, his eyes filled with a deep understanding. "I never expected anything in return, Elon," he said, "but I've always believed in you, and I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Proud to have had a small part in your journey." A silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of everything that had transpired over the years. It was as though time had folded back, and they were once again standing in a classroom filled with potential and possibility, just like they had all those years ago. After a few moments, Mr. Griffith gestured for Elon to sit at one of the desks, though it was clear that the desk was far too small for someone like him. Elon smiled and sat down, folding himself into the tiny chair, feeling strangely like the awkward child he once was. It was a reminder of how far he had come, and yet how deeply connected he still was to the person he had been. "Tell me everything," Mr. Griffith said, taking a seat across from him. "What's been going on with you? How are the rockets? How's everything?" Elon chuckled softly, shaking his head. "It's been a wild ride, Mr. Griffith, but I'm sure you've read all about it." Mr. Griffith smiled again, that same proud look in his eyes. "Oh, I've kept track of your career. You'd be surprised how many of my students end up doing great things. You were always the one I thought would go the farthest. You always had that fire in you." The conversation continued, the two of them reminiscing about old times and catching up on everything that had happened since they last saw each other. But as they talked, Elon couldn't help but feel that the real reason he had come to Petoria wasn't just to say thank you. It was to do something to help. Something to ensure that this school, this place that had shaped him and so many others, didn't disappear into the past. Elon looked at Mr. Griffith, his mind racing with ideas. "Mr. Griffith, I've been thinking," he said, "about the school, about what's happening here. I think I can help. I want to do something that will keep this place alive for future generations. Something that will honor you and the work you've done here." Mr. Griffith looked at him with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "What do you mean, Elon?" Elon leaned forward, his voice serious. "I want to save this school, not just the building, but the idea behind it. I want to help keep the spirit of what you've built here alive, long after we're gone." Mr. Griffith's eyes widened, and for the first time, Elon saw a flicker of disbelief, followed by a deep sense of hope. I don't know what to say," Mr. Griffith whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "This school has meant everything to me, to all of us, but I never imagined anyone would do something like that." "You believed in me when no one else did," Elon said, his voice steady. "I owe you this. Let me do this for you, for the school, and for all the kids who will come after us." Mr. Griffith smiled, his eyes misting with tears. "Elon, you've already given me more than I ever hoped for." Elon stood up, his resolve hardening. This was just the beginning. The room seemed to hum with a quiet energy as the two men sat across from each other. The once student and his teacher, reunited after decades, now facing the reality of the school's uncertain future. Elon could feel a deep sense of responsibility growing within him. It wasn't just about saving a building, not anymore. This was about something much bigger. It was about honoring the legacy of a man who had shaped his life and the lives of countless others. As the conversation shifted from the past to the present, Elon listened intently as Mr. Griffith shared more about the challenges facing Petoria Primary School. The details, once vague, were now clearer, and the weight of the situation began to sink in. The school, which had once been a beacon of hope for the community, was now a casualty of a system that was failing its most vulnerable. "The school has been struggling for years," Mr. Griffith said, his voice heavy with the burden of truth. "We've had budget cuts, of course, but the biggest issue is the land. The government has been trying to sell it for years, and now it's finally happening. The developers are waiting for us to close our doors so they can tear it down and build a shopping mall." Elon frowned as he took in the news. Petoria Primary School had been a cornerstone of the community for over 75 years, and now it was going to be destroyed to make room for a commercial development? The unfairness of it struck him hard. "I don't understand," Elon said, his voice growing more intense. "This school is clearly a success. Look at the students, the science projects, the creativity. You've nurtured some of the brightest minds here. Why would they shut it down?" Mr. Griffith nodded, his expression solemn. "It's all about numbers, Elon. The government doesn't see the value in schools like ours. We don't have the funding or resources of the wealthier schools. Our students don't come from affluent families. But that doesn't mean they don't have potential. We've produced doctors, engineers, even scientists. But none of that matters in the eyes of the authorities." Elon's mind was racing. He could see the potential of the school, its students, its teachers, its philosophy. This wasn't just a local issue. It was a systemic one. He couldn't just write a check and walk away. That wouldn't be enough. "So, what's the plan now?" Elon asked, his voice steady but filled with resolve. Mr. Griffith looked at him, his face a mixture of frustration and hope. "We've been given 3 months, Elon. 3 months before the building is sold and demolished. After that, the students will be scattered to other schools, most of which are already overcrowded. The teachers, many of whom have been here for years, will have to find other jobs. Some of them are talking about leaving the profession altogether." Elon sat back in his chair, his thoughts whirling. He had heard about schools facing budget cuts before, but this was different. This wasn't just about a lack of funding. It was about a community being torn apart. "I can't let this happen," Elon said, his voice firm with determination. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep this school open." Mr. Griffith's eyes softened as he looked at Elon. "You don't have to do anything, Elon. You've already done so much. You've changed the world in ways I could never have imagined. But if you're offering to help, we'd be honored." Elon nodded, his mind already working through 1,000 possibilities. He couldn't just let the school close and walk away. He had the resources, the connections, and the drive to make something happen. But he needed more information. He needed to understand what exactly was at stake here. "Can I see the financials?" Elon asked. "I need to understand the full picture. The costs, the budgets, the debt, everything." Mr. Griffith hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Of course. I'll get the documents for you." As Mr. Griffith stepped out of the room to retrieve the paperwork, Elon found himself looking around the classroom once more. The walls were adorned with science posters, some familiar, like diagrams of the solar system and energy cycles, others reflecting the students' personal projects. There were rocket drawings, wind turbine models, and charts about renewable energy. It was clear that the school had done the best it could with the resources it had, but it was also clear that without support, these young minds wouldn't have a future here. Elon's gaze shifted to the children's artwork displayed on the walls. The bright colors, the ambitious drawings, the hopeful words. This was a place where dreams were being made, where children were being taught not just facts, but how to think differently, just like he had been taught all those years ago. It struck him that this was more than a financial problem. It was a crisis of opportunity. How many children here, just like him, had big dreams, but no one to help them achieve them? How many brilliant minds had been overlooked by a system that didn't know how to nurture them? And how many of them would lose their chance to learn, to grow, to become the next generation of scientists, doctors, engineers, and innovators? As Mr. Griffith returned with the files, Elon opened them carefully, scanning through the documents. The numbers were grim. The school's funding was nearly gone. The building needed repairs that they couldn't afford, and the local government had already signed off on the land deal with the developers. It was clear that the situation was dire. But Elon wasn't deterred. If anyone could turn this around, it was him. "This is bad, but it's not impossible," Elon muttered to himself as he read through the reports. He looked up at Mr. Griffith. "We can buy this land. We can save this school." Mr. Griffith looked at him, his eyes filled with a mix of disbelief and hope. "You'd really do that?" Elon smiled, his eyes glinting with determination. "I have the resources, I have the connections, and I think I can make this work, but I need your help." Mr. Griffith nodded, his expression softening. "Of course, anything you need." It was then that Elon realized something even deeper. This wasn't just about saving a school. It was about continuing the legacy of Trevor, Mr. Griffith's son, who had passed away far too young. Trevor had believed in personalized education, in a system that adapted to each child's unique way of thinking and learning. And now, as Elon looked at the documents in front of him, he knew that he was about to help bring Trevor's vision to life, something that would honor the memory of a brilliant young man and change the future of education. "I think we're going to build something great here," Elon said, closing the files and looking up at Mr. Griffith. "And I think we're going to change the world." Mr. Griffith smiled, his eyes shining with pride and hope. "I knew you would, Elon. I always knew." Elon sat in silence for a moment, staring at the stack of documents in front of him. The weight of the decision before him was heavy, but it wasn't a decision he had made lightly. As he looked around the classroom once more, at the posters on the wall, the children's artwork, the desks filled with eager young minds, he knew what he had to do. This wasn't just a matter of saving an old building. This was about changing the future for these children, and for children all over the world. Elon's thoughts raced back to the days when he was a child at Petoria Primary, sitting at one of these desks, asking questions that seemed too big for his teachers to answer. He had always felt different, too curious, too inquisitive, too ambitious for a world that wasn't ready for his ideas. But Mr. Griffith had nurtured that curiosity, had given him the space to think, and more importantly, had told him that his questions mattered. That was the gift that Elon had received, and now he wanted to pass that gift forward, not just for himself, but for every child who could benefit from the same kind of encouragement. "I want to make this work," Elon said, looking up from the paperwork to meet Mr. Griffith's gaze. "This school, this community, it all means more than just a nostalgic visit. I want to save this place, not just for you, but for every kid who needs someone to believe in them. I don't just want to write a check and walk away. I want to create something that lasts." Mr. Griffith's eyes glistened with emotion as he listened to Elon's words. "You've already given us so much just by being here, Elon," he said. "But if you're serious about this, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, Mr. Griffith," Elon replied, his voice firm but filled with warmth. "I know this is a lot to take in, but I've already started working on it. We're going to buy the land, and we're going to rebuild this school. It's going to be a place where every child can dream, can ask questions, and can think for themselves. Just like you taught me." Mr. Griffith sat back in his chair, his expression a mix of disbelief and hope. "I can't believe this," he murmured. "You'd really do this for us?" Elon nodded. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't serious. I've already started making calls, and my team is getting the legal details in place. This school is going to stay open, and we're going to make it better than ever." The excitement in the room was palpable. For the first time in months, Mr. Griffith allowed himself to believe that the school he had given his life to might actually have a future. But Elon knew it wasn't just about keeping the school open. It was about changing the way education worked for these children, and for children everywhere. "I've been talking to my team," Elon continued, his mind already several steps ahead. "We're going to turn this place into a model for the future. We'll use cutting-edge technology, incorporate personalized learning, and create a curriculum that focuses on nurturing creativity and curiosity. The Trevor Griffith Foundation will help fund it, and we'll bring in the best educators to make sure it works." "Trevor's Foundation?" Mr. Griffith asked, his voice trembling slightly. "You're serious about using his ideas?" "I am," Elon said, his voice steady. "I've been thinking a lot about Trevor, about the vision he had for education, and it's something I believe in too. His ideas about personalized learning, about adapting education to each child's needs. Those ideas are ahead of their time, but they're exactly what we need to shape the future." Elon paused for a moment, his mind focused on the task at hand. This wasn't just about preserving the past. It was about creating something better, something that would not only honor Mr. Griffith and his son Trevor, but also make an impact on future generations of children, many of whom would be like the young Elon, curious, different, and hungry for knowledge. "I want to do more than just rebuild the school," Elon said, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "I want this to be a place where we teach kids not just to memorize facts, but to think critically, to ask questions, to solve problems in ways no one else has. We're going to create a new kind of education here, a new kind of future." Mr. Griffith nodded slowly, absorbing what Elon was saying. "I never thought I'd see the day when someone would take up the cause," he said softly. "But I can see now that it's not just about keeping the school open. It's about giving these kids the opportunities they deserve." Elon stood up, his mind already spinning with ideas. He walked over to the desk where Mr. Griffith had laid out the school's plans and started going through the documents. He could already picture it: new classrooms, new science labs, a library full of books, a technology center that would prepare students for the future. This wouldn't just be a place of learning, it would be a beacon of hope for every child who felt like they didn't belong in the traditional education system. As Elon flipped through the papers, a thought occurred to him. This wasn't just about education. It was about mentorship. It was about guiding kids like himself, kids who didn't fit the mold, kids who had big ideas and needed someone to believe in them. "Mr. Griffith," Elon said, looking up from the documents, "we're going to need more than just money and resources to make this work. We're going to need mentors, role models who can guide these kids and show them that their ideas are worth something, that they matter. I want to bring in people who can do that, people who can inspire these kids to dream bigger, just like you did for me." Mr. Griffith's eyes widened in understanding. "You want to bring in other leaders? Other innovators?" "Yes," Elon said with a smile. "Exactly. We'll create a network of people who can help these kids achieve their dreams, just like I had the chance to do. It's not just about the school building. It's about the future of every kid who walks through those doors." As the conversation continued, Elon's mind buzzed with possibilities. This wasn't just a project, it was a movement to revolutionize the way we approach education, to ensure that every child, regardless of their background, has the opportunity to think freely, dream big, and achieve greatness. By the end of the day, Elon had outlined a plan for the school's future, including the purchase of the land, a vision for the curriculum, and a roadmap for creating a network of mentors. The wheels were already in motion, and it was clear that this was only the beginning. Before he left the school, Elon turned to Mr. Griffith and said, "This is going to change everything. I know it. We're going to do something that hasn't been done before, and it's going to make a difference for these kids." Mr. Griffith smiled, his eyes full of pride. "I always knew you had it in you, Elon. You're going to do great things. I'm just glad I got to be a part of it." The next few weeks flew by in a blur of activity. Elon had never been one to sit idly by, especially when a challenge like this presented itself. He was determined to turn the tide for Petoria Primary School, and his mind was consumed with the logistics of making it happen. His teams at SpaceX, Tesla, and other ventures had already begun to mobilize, using every resource available to him to bring his vision to life. He had already made arrangements with local officials to begin the process of purchasing the land from the developers who had been preparing to buy it. Elon knew that this wasn't going to be an easy task. He would need to fight for the land, to renegotiate the terms of the sale, and, most importantly, prove that a better option existed for this community. But he was used to impossible odds. In fact, he thrived on them. Elon had also begun contacting experts in education, people he respected for their innovative work in personalized learning, to help him design a curriculum that would align with Trevor Griffith's vision. The school would be a place where kids weren't just taught to memorize facts, but encouraged to think critically, solve problems creatively, and explore their own interests. It would be a school where innovation was encouraged from day one, just as it had been for him all those years ago. In the meantime, he had reached out to mentors, business leaders, and engineers, people who had shaped the world in their own right, to volunteer their time and expertise to help these kids. His idea was simple: If he could provide these children with the same kind of mentorship he had received from Mr. Griffith, and later from others in his career, he could give them the tools to dream bigger than they ever thought possible. But as the weeks passed, Elon found himself struggling to balance his commitment to Petoria Primary School with the demands of his companies. There were constant calls and meetings about new developments, the latest innovations, and the ongoing challenges of running companies like Tesla and SpaceX. But the work for the school consumed his thoughts, and there was nothing he wanted more than to see this project succeed. Every day, Elon spent hours poring over plans for the school's new infrastructure. The current building needed more than just a coat of paint. It was aging, with cracked walls and outdated plumbing. There was no question. The school needed to be completely overhauled. But that was the easy part. The real challenge was redesigning it to meet the needs of a new era in education. One evening, as he sat in his office reviewing architectural plans, his phone rang. It was Mr. Griffith. "Elon, I've just spoken to Principal Domini. The board has agreed to meet with us tomorrow. They want to know more about your plans. They're hesitant, but they're willing to listen." Elon's heart skipped a beat. "That's great news. I'm ready. Tell them we're going to offer them a vision for something much better than what they had planned. This school is going to be a model for the future. It's going to show the world what's possible when you believe in kids and give them the tools they need to think outside the box." "I'll let them know," Mr. Griffith said. "But Elon, I'm still worried. You know how hard this is going to be, don't you? I'm not sure the people in charge understand what we're trying to do here." Elon leaned back in his chair, his eyes focused on the plans before him. He thought about all the hurdles they had already overcome. How many doors had been closed to him when he first began his ventures? How many times people told him something was impossible? "I understand," Elon said, his voice steady. "But this is the moment, Mr. Griffith. This is where we prove that things can be different. We can't let this chance slip away." The next morning, Elon met with Mr. Griffith and Principal Domini at the school. The meeting was tense. The board members were skeptical, unsure of Elon's grand plans. They were accustomed to looking at the numbers, at the bottom line, and at the practicalities of running a school on a limited budget. But Elon wasn't there to talk about budgets. He wasn't there to settle for what everyone else thought was possible. He stood before the group of board members, his energy palpable as he laid out his vision. "What we're talking about here is more than just a school," Elon said. "We're creating an institution that will change the way we think about education. We're going to use technology, innovation, and mentorship to build something that will help these kids reach their full potential. A place where every student will be seen as an individual with their own strengths and ideas. Where we give them the tools they need to think for themselves and solve the problems the world will face in the future." He paused, letting the words sink in. There was a silence in the room, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Then Principal Domini spoke up. "Elon is right," he said, his voice strong despite his illness. "This is about more than just classrooms and textbooks. It's about giving these kids the freedom to dream, to think, and to create. It's about making sure that they have the same opportunities that any other child would have in a well-funded school. This is our chance to do something truly revolutionary." Elon smiled, his confidence growing. He could see the board members starting to nod, beginning to understand the magnitude of what they were discussing. But there was still resistance, still a reluctance to fully embrace the idea. "You're asking us to invest in a dream," one of the board members said skeptically. "We don't have the resources for this. We're already struggling to keep the school afloat." "I'm not asking you to invest in just any dream," Elon replied, his voice unwavering. "I'm asking you to invest in the future. I have the resources to make this happen. You won't be alone in this. We're going to turn this school into something that will inspire not just the kids here, but children everywhere. I will match whatever you're willing to commit." The conversation stretched into the afternoon, with Elon outlining his plans in detail. He talked about the technology center, the personalized learning programs, and how they would integrate real-world problem-solving into the curriculum. He didn't just want this school to survive, he wanted it to thrive, to become an example for others to follow. By the end of the meeting, Elon had secured the board's tentative agreement to move forward with the plans. It wasn't a full endorsement yet, but it was a significant step in the right direction. The board members had agreed to take the next few weeks to assess the proposal and discuss how they could make it work within the school's current framework. As Elon walked out of the meeting with Mr. Griffith and Principal Domini, he felt a surge of optimism. This was just the beginning. He had seen the way the board had started to warm to his ideas, the way their skepticism had slowly been replaced with curiosity and hope. He knew they weren't fully on board yet, but that would come in time. The next few months were a whirlwind. Elon and his team worked tirelessly to secure the land, finalize the school's redesign, and bring in the resources needed to build the new curriculum. At the same time, he worked with Mr. Griffith to start reaching out to mentors and innovators who could help guide the students. They brought in people from all walks of life, scientists, engineers, artists, entrepreneurs, people who could inspire the next generation of dreamers. It wasn't just about the physical school. It was about creating an ecosystem of support, a place where students could thrive no matter their background. Elon knew that if they could get this right, it wouldn't just change Petoria, it would change education as a whole. The future was bright, and this was only the beginning. Elon's life was moving at a dizzying pace. Between managing the day-to-day operations of his companies and focusing on the transformation of Petoria Primary School, he barely had time to sleep, let alone relax. But despite the exhaustion, there was an excitement in the air, an electricity that he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about building a new school. It was about creating something that would have an impact far beyond the walls of this one classroom. It was about changing the future of education, one child at a time. The work at Petoria Primary had begun in earnest. The first step was securing the land. Elon had leveraged his influence and resources to outbid the developers who had been planning to buy it. It hadn't been an easy fight. There were hurdles at every turn, from local government regulations to fierce opposition from those who saw the land as little more than a valuable piece of real estate. But Elon didn't back down. He knew that this school represented more than just an old building. It represented hope, opportunity, and the future of children who were often overlooked by the system. After weeks of negotiation, the deal was finally done. The land had been secured, and Elon had placed the first stakes for what would eventually become a cutting-edge educational facility. An example of what could be achieved when resources, vision, and passion were brought together to fight for a cause greater than personal gain. While the paperwork was being finalized, Elon turned his attention to the redesign of the school itself. Architects, engineers, and educational experts from all over the world were brought in to help craft a vision for the new Petoria Primary. The plans called for more than just new classrooms. They envisioned a place where technology and creativity would flourish together, where every child would be encouraged to pursue their passions and solve real-world problems. One of the most important elements of Elon's plan was the creation of a Trevor Griffith Technology Center, a state-of-the-art facility that would house a robotics lab, computer programming workshops, and innovation hubs for students to explore their interests in science and engineering. The center would honor Trevor's legacy, a brilliant young mind whose untimely death had left a hole in the world of education and technology. But the physical transformation was only part of the equation. Elon also knew that this school needed to be a place of mentorship. He remembered how much it had meant to him when Mr. Griffith had mentored him, taught him that failure was just a part of the learning process, and believed in his potential when no one else did. Elon's goal was to ensure that every student at Petoria Primary had access to the same kind of mentorship that had helped him succeed. To that end, he reached out to leaders across industries, engineers, scientists, artists, even fellow entrepreneurs, to donate their time and expertise. It wasn't just about money, it was about giving these children the opportunity to sit side by side with people who had changed the world and could show them how to do the same. One afternoon, Elon visited the school to meet with some of the mentors who had signed up to help. The school was still a construction site, walls being torn down, new foundations being laid, but the energy in the air was unmistakable. Outside the classrooms, children were already gathering in groups, discussing ideas, asking questions, and sketching designs for their future projects. "I never thought I'd see this day," Mr. Griffith said, his voice filled with awe as he walked with Elon through the construction zone. "It's happening, Elon. It's really happening." "I know," Elon said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. It's just the beginning. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but we're building something that's going to last. They passed a group of students who were gathered around a table, assembling a model of a solar-powered car. The children were talking excitedly, their hands moving with purpose as they put together the pieces of their project. Elon stopped to watch for a moment, a smile playing on his lips. "That's the spirit we need," Elon said to Mr. Griffith. "These kids are already thinking outside the box. They're solving problems. They're creating the future." Mr. Griffith nodded. "You've given them the opportunity to dream, and that's the most important thing we can do for them." Elon's eyes scanned the work being done, and he couldn't help but think about how far he'd come from the awkward, isolated boy he had once been. He had found his place here, in the world of innovation and possibility, but it was clear to him now that the real gift was giving that same opportunity to others. Every child here, regardless of their background, deserved the chance to think freely, to ask questions, and to follow their curiosity wherever it led them. That evening, as the sun set over Petoria, Elon met with a group of local educators and school officials to discuss the curriculum. Together, they brainstormed ideas for how to integrate real-world problem-solving into every aspect of the school's learning. It wasn't enough to teach kids how to solve equations or memorize facts. They needed to learn how to apply that knowledge to the challenges they would face in the world. Elon's vision was clear. The school would be a place where kids were encouraged to explore their passions, work together, and solve problems in creative ways. Every student would have access to the tools and resources they needed to pursue their dreams, and mentors from all fields would be there to guide them along the way. It was a big dream, but it was a dream that was beginning to take shape. As the weeks passed, the construction of the school moved forward at a remarkable pace. New classrooms, a gymnasium, and the technology center began to rise from the ground. The walls that had once held memories of a school struggling to survive were now giving way to a new future, one filled with hope, possibility, and a belief that every child deserved the chance to succeed. Elon spent his days in meetings, making sure everything was running smoothly, but his nights were often spent reviewing plans, sending emails, and meeting with the mentors who were eager to get involved. The more he worked, the more he saw the potential for Petoria Primary to become a shining example of what education could be when it was designed to inspire creativity, curiosity, and critical thinking. One afternoon, as he walked through the nearly completed halls of the school, he saw a group of young students gathered around a table, excitedly discussing the future of space travel. They were talking about rockets, Mars, and the possibility of humans becoming a multiplanetary species. Elon stopped to listen, his heart swelling with pride. This was it. This was the future he had envisioned, the future where every child, no matter where they came from, could dream big and aim high. "I'm going to be the first one on Mars," one of the kids declared confidently, a smile on his face as he looked up at Elon. Elon chuckled. "I believe you. Just make sure you bring your solar panels with you." The students laughed, and for a moment, everything felt right in the world. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the school grounds, Elon stood in the courtyard, watching the children play. There was something profoundly moving about the scene, about the fact that this school, once on the verge of closing, was now a thriving hub of possibility. "Thank you," Mr. Griffith said, stepping up beside him. "I don't think I've ever seen anything like this in my life." Elon smiled. "This is just the beginning. There's so much more to come." The transformation of Petoria Primary was well underway, and Elon knew that the ripple effect of what they were building here would spread far beyond the borders of South Africa. It would inspire schools around the world to think differently about education, to focus on the potential of every student, and to believe that every child could be a part of the solution to the world's greatest challenges. It was a vision worth fighting for. The transformation of Petoria Primary School was nothing short of remarkable. In just a few short months, what had once been a crumbling building on the verge of demolition had been reborn into a symbol of hope, innovation, and possibility. Elon watched as the vision he had fought so hard for came to life. One brick, one lesson, one student at a time. The construction had finished ahead of schedule, and the new school building stood proudly at the heart of Petoria. its modern design seamlessly blended with the rich history of the original structure. With classrooms filled with cutting-edge technology, open spaces for collaboration, and state-of-the-art laboratories, the Trevor Griffith Technology Center had become the crown jewel of the campus, a place where students could engage in hands-on learning and experiment with ideas that had once seemed too big to tackle. The school buzzed with energy. Students filled the halls, eager to learn, explore, and create. They weren't just going to school, they were embarking on a journey of discovery. And at the center of it all was Mr. Griffith, still teaching with the same passion and enthusiasm that had inspired Elon all those years ago. For the first time in years, the school staff felt a renewed sense of purpose. The mentors Elon had recruited from all over the world had become an integral part of the school's fabric. They weren't just volunteers, they were teachers, guides, and role models, bringing real-world experience to the classroom and inspiring the students to dream big and think critically. Whether it was a scientist showing kids how to build a solar panel, an artist teaching them to express their creativity, or an engineer walking them through the basics of robotics, the students at Petoria Primary now had access to a level of mentorship that no one could have imagined before. Elon had made sure that the school was not just a place of learning, it was a place of opportunity. Every child who walked through the doors of Petoria Primary was given the chance to think for themselves, to ask questions, and to solve problems in ways that would help shape the world of tomorrow. As he stood in the courtyard, watching the students work together on a project to design a wind-powered water pump for local farms, Elon felt a deep sense of pride. This wasn't just about saving a school, it was about changing the course of these children's lives. They were learning skills that would serve them for a lifetime, skills that would allow them to tackle some of the world's most pressing challenges. "Look at them," Mr. Griffith said, his voice filled with awe. "These kids, they're going to do great things, aren't they?" Elon smiled. "They already are. They just needed someone to believe in them." It wasn't just the students who had been changed by the school's transformation. The entire community had been revitalized. Petoria, once a place struggling to find its footing, was now a beacon of progress. The new school had sparked a wave of local investment, with businesses and organizations eager to support the school and its mission. The parents of the students were proud of what their children were achieving, and they knew that their futures had been secured in ways that they never thought possible. The news of Petoria Primary's transformation spread quickly, not just throughout South Africa, but around the world. Education experts, philanthropists, and government officials visited the school, eager to learn from what Elon had created. The Trevor Griffith Foundation, now a well-known organization dedicated to advancing personalized education, began receiving attention and support from organizations and governments around the globe. Elon's commitment to education had become one of his most important legacies. What had started as a simple desire to repay a teacher's kindness had grown into a global movement, one that aimed to reshape the way children were taught, to make education more personalized, more inclusive, and more focused on nurturing creativity and critical thinking. But Elon wasn't finished yet. He knew that what they had created at Petoria Primary was just the beginning. The ideas that had flourished in this small school could be adapted and scaled, reaching children everywhere. It wasn't about simply creating another elite school. It was about creating a model that could be replicated, one that didn't just teach kids what to think, but taught them how to think. As the school year progressed, Elon continued to visit Petoria Primary regularly, checking in on the progress of the students and the staff. He would often sit in on classes, watching the teachers guide the students through complex problems, offering advice, or simply giving them the space to explore their ideas. One day, as he walked through the halls of the school, a young girl ran up to him, her eyes wide with excitement. It was Fandy, the girl who had asked him about solar panels during his first visit. "Mr. Musk," she exclaimed, pulling a small solar-powered robot from her backpack. "Look, I made this. It can clean the ocean using solar power. I'm going to show the class how it works." Elon smiled, impressed. "That's amazing, Fandy. Keep thinking big. You're on the right path." The pride in her eyes was enough to make him realize just how far they had come. Fandy wasn't the only one with big dreams. Every child here had the potential to change the world in their own way. And now, with the tools and support they needed, they were well on their way to doing just that. As the months passed, the school's impact grew. The Petoria Primary Model, with its focus on personalized learning, mentorship, and hands-on problem-solving, began to inspire educational reform efforts in other parts of the world. Elon and the Trevor Griffith Foundation were invited to speak at conferences, share their insights, and work with governments and organizations to implement similar programs in other schools. One afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the school's new buildings, Mr. Griffith stood next to Elon on the balcony of the Trevor Griffith Technology Center. "You did it," Mr. Griffith said, his voice quiet, full of emotion. "You've changed everything." Elon looked at the children playing below, their laughter filling the air. "We did it," he corrected. "This was never just me. It was all of us, together." And in that moment, Elon realized something profound. This wasn't just about building a school. It was about building a future where every child, regardless of where they came from, had the chance to realize their dreams. A future where education didn't just focus on filling minds with facts, but on nurturing the creativity and curiosity that could change the world. As he stood there, watching the students of Petoria Primary School play, laugh, and dream, he knew that this was the legacy that would endure, not just in Petoria, but in every child who had the chance to be a part of it.